we've established that for short-run equilibrium in a competitive industry, in a perfectly competitive industry, we need to have the market be in equilibrium, that is, demand is equal to supply, and we also need the firm to not want to have any change, that is, it has marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and at a price exceeding average variable cost. And so, on this picture, that was definitely a short-run equilibrium. Marginal revenue, demand is equal to supply. That price-quantity combination is perfect. The amount that people want to purchase is exactly equal to what people want to supply. It's an outcome, no tendency for change. Over here, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right at this point, the red dot, and it is in excess of average total cost. Firms are pretty happy right now, I got to tell you. They've got a vertical gap that is their markup per unit, and that allows them to earn profit of that rectangle. So profit, which is equal to quantity times the per unit markup, is positive here. And so the next question is, what about the long run? We know this is a short run equilibrium. What about the long run? Well, one thing we notice in this situation is that the firm is making positive profits. Now, if the firm is making positive profits, we remember that means that's positive economic profits. And that means they're making a rate of return in excess of what they could make elsewhere. Their opportunity cost, which they have to subtract off, is less than what would drive them to want to move to a different industry. Now, the thing is, that's a good life for this person, and this person's got a big smile on his or her face. But the fact of the matter is that when you say that the people in this industry are earning a greater return than people in a different industry, what's that mean about these people in a different industry? Well, they want a piece of that action. They say, hey, wait a minute. I'm sitting here making these black rubber sandals when I should be making high-top basketball shoes. That's where all the action is. I want to get in that market. If you're in this lower level, say making 5% rate of return, and you see them making 8% rate of return, you say, wait a minute. Why don't I make some of that product? So the existence of positive profits implies entry. Firms on the outside are going to observe what you're doing in there and say, I want a piece of that action because they're making more. You, of course, know you don't want out because you're making more than anybody in the next best alternative. But there are people in that next best alternative who say, well, give me some of that. Entry means what? Entry means that market supply will shift to the right. How do I know that? Well, just remember, in the market, the supply curve is equal to the sum for I equals 1 to n of the marginal cost of the players in the industry. Well, if entry happens, this is growing. There's more of these that you're adding up. And what that means is that this curve itself will shift to the right. Let's go back and see how that happens on our picture. On this graph, that was a short-run equilibrium. The left-hand panel, supply equals demand, good. Right-hand panel, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, good. But when we start thinking about the long run, people are going to say, hey, let me get in that industry. And as they get in the industry, what's happening? Well, this curve, which we know is just the sum of the marginal costs of the players, there's going to be more players, so that's going to shift to the right. And if I had a really clever process here, I might have an animation that shows how this happened. But, you know, the curve is going to go out. And as it goes out, let's just pick some intermediate level. That's so thin arrow. It shifted out here to S1. And as it shifts out, what's happening? Well, market price is being depressed. As market price goes down to P1, this goes out to the firms, and we have a new marginal revenue, MR1. Now, is that a long-run equilibrium? And the answer graph is kind of cluttered here, but what's happening is that you can see this price, the marginal revenue, marginal cost, is still above average total cost. Entry has happened, and profits per firm are falling, but they haven't they haven't fallen enough to stop the entry. They're still making money, positive economic profit, which means they're making money above and beyond what people are making in another industry. Not as much as they used to. They used to have a big markup. Now their price is falling, their profits are falling, and they're eroding back more towards what that would be in another business. The way I've shown this, we haven't had enough entry. The profits are still positive, and as this slide showed you, the existence of positive profit implies entry, so entry is going to continue here. And in fact, how far will entry continue? Well, we know that in the long run, that supply will have to shift out enough that the new market price, which we'll call P2, sends a marginal revenue curve, which is just tangent to that average cost curve. If price hasn't fallen that much, then price is still going to be above the average cost curve. When you go to where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and that's where the firm is always going to go, for any price in this region, the marginal revenue hits marginal cost part is going to be above the average cost curve. That means there's still positive profits. Only when price gets driven down to where it's just touching the average cost curve. And remember, when we built the cost curves, we found that the marginal cost curve goes through the dead minimum of the average total cost curve. In that particular case, that price, which will hit marginal cost right at the dead minimum of average total cost, means profits are zero. And so we have to add a new page. And this page talks about equilibrium condition for the long run. First, the market has to be happy. Demand has got to be equal to supply. That was a short run condition too. Second, the individual players in the industry have to be happy. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost greater than or equal to average variable cost, right? So we're not violating a shutdown condition. And the third condition has to be that profits are equal to zero. Economic profits are equal to zero. If economic profits are positive, we're not in the long run equilibrium. Positive economic profits means that in the long run, that's when you can change all inputs. People are going to say, hey, they're making more over there than we are over here. We want in there. Only when that margin is driven away in our perfectly competitive industry, when that's driven away, will we find long-run equilibrium. See, some of you might be saying to yourself right now, wait a minute, do you really mean to tell me, standing there talking to me right now, that equilibrium in a competitive industry has zero profits? Well, don't mix accounting profits with economic profits. They could have a wildly successful quarter and report $10 million in accounting profit to the government and pay taxes on $10 million in accounting profit. But if their next best alternative is also about $10 million given the size of their asset, then they're getting zero economic profit. That's all I'm saying here, is that profit in the economic sense has to be driven to zero. If it's not, there's still going to be a tendency for people on the outside to get in, that is if profits are positive, or on the inside to get out if profits are negative.